Prince Louis has done it again, providing yet another cheeky moment at a public event, this time.
Prince Louis has always entered the public eye in small, unforgettable flashes. A grin too wide for a royal balcony, a wave that turns into a joke, a child who seems blissfully unaware that the world is watching him grow up in real time. For many people, he is not a headline, he is a feeling, a reminder that even inside palaces, childhood still finds a way to laugh. So when headlines suddenly began circulating about a critical update from the palace, it stopped people in their tracks. The word critical carries weight. It suggests urgency, change, even danger. Royal watchers leaned in, expecting a turning point, a formal announcement, something that would redefine how we see the youngest member of the Wales family. But as the story unfolded, something quieter emerged. There was no dramatic decree, no shift in succession, no sudden burden placed on a 7-year-old child. Instead, the so-called update revealed something far more subtle, and perhaps far more important. It was not really about Prince Louis at all. It was about the invisible choices being made around him, the boundaries drawn, the moments deliberately kept small, the decisions to protect something fragile in a world that rarely stops asking for more. In an age where every gesture can become a viral clip and every child a symbol, the real story was not about what Louis is becoming. It was about what the monarchy is choosing not to take from him yet: his ordinary days, his unfiltered joy, his right to exist without meaning being constantly assigned. If you have followed the royal family for years, or if the first time you noticed Prince Louis was one of those spontaneous, human moments that made you smile, take a second and sit with that memory. When did he first stand out to you? On a balcony? At a celebration? In a quiet photograph beside his siblings? You can share that moment in the comments. And if stories like this, stories that look past the noise and focus on what is being quietly preserved, matter to you, staying connected helps keep them alive. Because to understand who Prince Louis is today, we cannot start with headlines or updates. We have to step inside the home where he is growing up, inside the rooms where the cameras are not invited, and where the most important choices are being made in silence. For the Wales family, the past year did not unfold in headlines alone. It unfolded in living rooms, in quiet hallways, in the unspoken pauses between ordinary days. Behind the composed public appearances, there was a season marked by uncertainty. Catherine facing a serious health scare. King Charles undergoing treatment. Two pillars of stability suddenly vulnerable at the same time. For adults, illness arrives with language, diagnoses, schedules, explanations. For a child of 7, it arrives differently. It changes the air in a room. It alters routines. It introduces a tension that does not need words to be felt. Prince Louis did not need to understand every medical detail to know that something had shifted. Children rarely do, but they are experts at reading atmosphere. At an age when most worries revolve around school projects and weekend plans, Louis found himself surrounded by conversations spoken more softly than usual. Adults lingering a little longer in doorways. Smiles that were gentle, but carried weight. Moments when his mother needed rest instead of play. And when family gatherings took on a quieter tone, William and Catherine made a deliberate choice in how they guided him through it. They did not hide reality behind silence, nor did they overwhelm him with fear. They spoke in simple, honest language. They explained that his mother was not feeling well, that doctors were helping her get better, and that rest was part of healing. There were no dramatic reassurances, no false promises, just calm truths shaped to fit a child's world. That balance matters more than it sounds. Children do not need to know everything, but they need to trust the emotional landscape around them. William and Catherine understood this instinctively. They allowed questions. They listened without rushing to fix feelings. They let worry exist without letting it dominate the room. In many ways, Louis responded as children often do when they feel safe. He adapted. He stayed curious. He filled quiet moments with movement, drawings, laughter, and small acts of affection that felt natural rather than forced. A handmade card left on a table, a picture drawn with extra care, a joke told at just the right moment to lift the room. These gestures were not signs of a child carrying emotional responsibility. They were signs of a child who felt connected. When children sense that they are part of a shared emotional space, they contribute in the only ways they know how, not through understanding illness, but through preserving warmth. Teachers noticed it too. Louis remained energetic, interested in nature, animals, and the small discoveries that still define his days. At school, he was not described as burdened or withdrawn, but as engaged, playful, and curious. The contrast between public concern and private normality was not accidental. It was built carefully, day by day. At home, evenings became simpler and more intentional. Meals shared without distraction. Time together that did not require explanation. Ordinary routines turned into anchors. These moments did not erase uncertainty, but they softened it. They reminded everyone, especially the children, that stability does not come from certainty. It comes from presence. What stands out most is not how much Louis understood, but how little he needed to. Children are not comforted by information. They are comforted by consistency, by knowing who will tuck them in, by recognizing familiar rhythms, even when circumstances change. William and Catherine protected those rhythms fiercely. This year could have become the moment when Louis was introduced, too early, to the weight of legacy, illness, and public concern. Instead, it became a lesson in emotional sheltering, a demonstration that childhood does not need to be explained away in difficult times. It needs to be defended. And in that quiet defense, something else became clear. In moments of uncertainty, parenting is no longer just guidance. It becomes the structure holding everything else upright. What has emerged inside the Wales household over the past few years is not a loud declaration or a carefully branded philosophy. It is a quiet, consistent way of raising children that stands in sharp contrast to what royal parenting once looked like. There are no speeches announcing it, no manifestos, just small rules, repeated daily, that slowly reshape a childhood. One of the simplest rules has become the most revealing. There are no mobile phones. Not for George, not for Charlotte, not for Louis. In a world where childhood is increasingly mediated through screens, William and Catherine made a deliberate choice to delay that door for as long as possible. Evenings are not fractured by notifications. Attention is not split between conversations and glowing rectangles. Time together is not something that competes with the outside world. It is protected from it. Dinner, in particular, holds weight in their home. It is not a performance or a formality. It is a pause, a moment when everyone is present, not just physically, but emotionally. Stories are shared, silences are allowed, Laughter appears without being prompted. These meals are not designed to teach lessons directly, yet lessons settle in naturally. How to listen, how to wait, how to exist in the same space without distraction. Family time, in this household, is treated as non-negotiable. It is not something squeezed between obligations. It is the foundation around which everything else is arranged. William has been open about walking his children to school when he can, helping with homework, attending meetings that many would never expect a future king to prioritize. These are not symbolic gestures, they are habits. In this, William represents a distinctly modern version of fatherhood, not distant, not ceremonial, not defined by absence. His presence is not limited to public moments. It extends into ordinary routines where no cameras are waiting. That choice did not appear out of nowhere. It was shaped by memory. William grew up under an intensity of attention that few children could withstand. His childhood unfolded alongside one of the most scrutinized marriages in the world. Cameras were not occasional intrusions. They were constant companions. Moments of vulnerability became headlines. Moments of confusion became speculation. Even love was often filtered through public expectation. There is no need for William to speak openly about those years for their influence to be felt. The contrast between how he was raised and how he is raising his own children speaks quietly, but clearly, where his childhood was exposed. His children's is sheltered. Where his emotions were often interpreted by strangers, his children's are allowed to remain private. Catherine's influence adds another layer to this approach. Her work in early childhood has long focused on emotional development, mental health, and the lasting impact of formative years. For her, childhood is not a waiting room for adulthood. It is a critical period where safety, attachment, and presence shape everything that follows. This belief is woven into the fabric of their home. Play is not treated as trivial. Outdoor time is not optional. Curiosity is encouraged rather than managed. When challenges arise, they are addressed with honesty, scaled to a child's understanding. Not dramatic explanations, not avoidance, but clarity wrapped in reassurance. Together, William and Catherine have created an environment where their children are not rushed toward meaning. They are not trained to perform their roles before they are ready. Instead, they are allowed to grow into themselves first. The titles will come later. The expectations will arrive in time. For now, identity is not tied to position. This approach becomes especially important for Louis. As the youngest, he occupies a unique space. He is visible enough to be adored, yet distant enough from succession to become a symbol in other ways. Playful moments risk being interpreted as personality. Innocent gestures risk being assigned narrative weight. William and Catherine seem acutely aware of this danger. Their boundaries are not about hiding Louis from the world entirely. They are about protecting him from being defined by it too early, from becoming a shorthand for joy, resilience, or future promise before he has had the chance to simply exist. In doing so, they are quietly redefining what it means to raise royal children, not as assets to be managed or images to be curated, but as human beings whose inner lives deserve privacy. This is not a rejection of duty. It is a postponement of it. Louis, in this framework, is not being shielded from responsibility forever. He is being shielded from it until it can be carried freely, not imposed, not extracted by public appetite. He is not only protected from the press, he is protected from becoming a symbol before he understands who he is without one. By the time Prince Louis began appearing more regularly at public events, the reaction was almost instant. Crowds did not just notice him, they warmed to him. His expressions were unguarded, his movements unscripted. In spaces designed for protocol and restraint, he brought something disarming and human. A laugh that arrived at the wrong moment, a wave that lingered too long, a face that revealed exactly what he was feeling without calculation. At ceremonies, on balconies, during national commemorations, Louis often became the moment people talked about afterward, not because he broke rules, but because he reminded the public of something easily forgotten, that royalty, at its youngest level, is still childhood. The public affection that followed was genuine. It was not manufactured by press releases or carefully staged appearances. It grew organically, fueled by brief glimpses that felt unscripted in a world accustomed to polish. With that affection came something else: expectation. When a child captures the public imagination, admiration rarely remains passive. It begins to reach outward. Invitations appear. Symbols form. People want to include that child in causes, narratives, and moments larger than themselves. In Louis' case, this arrived in the form of a letter that, on the surface, seemed harmless and even charming. The organizers of the World Conquer Championships, a playful British fundraising event supporting people living with sight loss, reached out with an idea. They had heard of Louis' fascination with collecting conquers. They thought it would be delightful if he became an honorary patron. It was not a political request. It was not grand or strategic. It was warm, imaginative, and clearly well-intentioned. The public loved the idea instantly. It fit the image they already held. The young prince, turning an innocent childhood hobby into a symbol of national charm and goodwill. It felt like a perfect story waiting to happen. But the palace response did not follow the expected script. The invitation was politely declined. The wording was gentle, even humorous. Louis, the reply explained, was currently concentrating on his studies. The line was delivered with a light touch, and it traveled quickly across headlines and social media. Many laughed. Some applauded the wit. Others saw it as a refreshingly human response from an institution often accused of stiffness. Yet the real meaning of that moment went far beyond humor. This was not a joke for the sake of charm. It was a boundary. By declining an honorary role, even one wrapped in goodwill, William and Catherine made something clear. Louis's childhood was not open for early symbolic assignments. No matter how endearing, his interests could remain his own, without being repurposed into public identity. His hobbies did not need to become statements. His presence did not need to be leveraged. In a monarchy long shaped by public expectation, this was a quiet but decisive choice. It signaled that affection, while welcomed, does not automatically grant access. That admiration does not require participation, and that childhood, once given away too early, cannot be reclaimed. The tension here is subtle, but it matters. The public does not ask for more out of malice. It asks because it feels connected, because it sees something pure and wants to protect it by celebrating it. But celebration can become pressure without anyone noticing when the shift occurs. William and Catherine appear deeply aware of this line. They do not reject public love. They simply refuse to let it accelerate their children's lives. The palace response was a reminder that timing matters. that not every good idea needs to be accepted. That restraint can be an act of care. For Louis, this means something rare. It means his public image remains incomplete by design. He is not yet a representative, not yet a figurehead, not yet a cause. He is allowed to be undefined. In an age where visibility often equals value, that decision stands out. It is not loud. It does not demand praise, but it quietly reshapes the relationship between the public and the youngest members of the royal family. And this is where the story begins to tighten. Because, as public affection grows, so does the desire for access. And, as that desire increases, the choices made by the Wales family become more deliberate. When the public wants more, they choose less. There is a moment when affection quietly turns into projection. It does not announce itself. It arrives disguised as praise, as curiosity, as excitement about what a child might become. And this is the moment where the line between symbol and child begins to blur. As Prince Louis appeared more frequently at public events, media narratives began to shift. He was no longer just the youngest sibling with a mischievous smile. He became something else in headlines and commentary. A sign, a promise, a future tone setter. Words like destined, natural, and born for this began to appear, often without anyone stopping to ask what those labels quietly demand in return. The turning point for many observers came during the commemoration of Victory in Europe Day. Standing alongside his family, Louis appeared calmer than usual, more still, more observant. Cameras caught him glancing toward his father, mirroring posture, absorbing cues. For some, it was simply a child responding to a serious atmosphere. For others, it became a story about emergence. Commentary followed quickly. This was described as growth, as maturity, as the first sign of understanding royal duty, a glimpse of the man he might one day become. The language was not cruel. It was admiring. But admiration, when layered onto a child, can become weight before it becomes meaning. This is where the danger lives, not in criticism, but in expectation. Children do not experience symbolism the way adults do. When adults project destiny onto a child, they rarely mean harm. They mean to celebrate, to feel hopeful, to connect. But symbolism compresses complexity. It flattens a person into a role before they have chosen one. For a child growing up under constant observation, that compression can arrive early and stay quietly persistent. The risk is not that Louis will feel pressure tomorrow. The risk is that pressure becomes background noise, something absorbed rather than noticed, something that shapes choices before he understands where those choices come from. History offers enough caution here. Royal children, particularly those close enough to power to be seen but distant enough to be undefined, have often carried expectations they did not ask for. Expectations to balance tradition with charm, to soften institutions, to represent hope without authority. These are adult burdens, even when framed as compliments. What makes this moment different is not the public response, but the parental one. William and Catherine do not appear surprised by these narratives, nor do they confront them directly. Instead, they respond with quiet resistance. They do not rush to frame Louis's behavior as meaning something larger. They do not amplify moments of seriousness as signs of readiness. They allow ambiguity to remain. This restraint matters. It interrupts a pattern, that has long existed within monarchy and celebrity culture alike. The pattern of turning children into proof points, into reassurance, into emotional anchors for public sentiment. If you grew up with expectations placed on you before you understood them, this part of the story may feel familiar. Perhaps you were praised for being mature beyond your years, or told you would carry something important, or subtly shaped by what others believed you were meant to become. Those labels often arrive as love, but they can quietly limit who we allow ourselves to be. What do you think should come first when raising children in the public eye? Protection or preparation? Freedom or early responsibility? If this question resonates with you, you can share your thoughts below. And if you know someone who cares deeply about modern parenting, about how children are shaped by unseen pressures, this is a conversation worth sharing. William and Catherine seem to be answering that question in their own way, not with statements, but with choices, by letting moments pass without explanation, by refusing to turn behavior into prophecy, by keeping Louis's public identity intentionally unfinished. They understand something that is easy to overlook. Once a child becomes a symbol, it is very hard to give them their personhood back. Symbols are not allowed to change freely. Children must be. The VE Day appearance did not reveal a future role. It revealed a boundary being tested, a reminder of how quickly narratives can form, and how carefully they must be handled. And as those narratives grow louder, the Wales family's approach becomes even clearer. They are not preparing Louis to meet expectation yet. They are protecting him from it. And that protection is not accidental. It is informed. It is deliberate. And it points toward a deeper philosophy that goes beyond any single child or moment. What emerges beneath all these careful choices is not simply a parenting style, but a different vision of what the monarchy itself might become. It is a vision shaped less by ceremony and more by values, less by expectation and more by trust. Prince William has offered rare glimpses into this worldview over the years, often without realizing how significant his words sound when placed against royal history. In one widely discussed moment, he spoke openly about how he would respond if any of his children were to come out as gay. His answer was simple and unguarded. He would love and support them completely. His only concern, he said, would be the pressure and scrutiny they might face from the outside world. That distinction matters. The concern was not about identity. It was about exposure, not about who his children are, but about how the world treats them once labels are attached. In that moment, William was not speaking as an heir to the throne. He was speaking as a father who understands how quickly public judgment can replace private safety. This perspective quietly reframes everything. It places human well-being before institutional continuity. It suggests that character matters more than compliance, and that happiness is not a threat to duty, but its foundation. In this household, value is not assigned by position in the line of succession. George, Charlotte, and Louis are not being raised as future roles in waiting. They are being raised as individuals whose paths remain intentionally open. One child may one day shoulder immense responsibility. Another may support quietly. Another may choose a life largely outside the formal structure altogether. None of these outcomes are treated as failures or deviations. That freedom is radical in its own way. For generations, monarchy relied on inevitability. Children were shaped early to fit predetermined outlines. There was comfort in certainty, but also rigidity. William and Catherine appear to be loosening that structure, not by rejecting tradition, But by delaying its imposition, their children are learning values before duties, empathy before protocol, and self-awareness before symbolism. Louis, in this context, becomes representative of something larger without being forced to carry it. He is allowed to explore who he is before being told what he must mean. George is being prepared carefully, but not consumed by destiny. Charlotte is being raised with confidence that is not defined by comparison. Each child is treated as complete in their own right, not as supporting characters in a larger narrative. This approach does not weaken the monarchy. It humanizes it. Institutions do not survive on rituals alone. They survive on belief. Belief is not commanded. It is earned, generation by generation, through consistency between values and actions. When people see children raised with care, boundaries, and authenticity, trust follows naturally, not because of spectacle, but because of relatability. William and Catherine seem to understand that the future of the monarchy will not be secured by perfect appearances. It will be secured by credibility, by showing that power can coexist with compassion. That tradition can adapt without dissolving. That authority does not require emotional distance. In choosing to raise their children this way, they are also speaking quietly to the public. They are saying that strength does not come from emotional hardness. That leadership begins long before titles are assumed. That protecting childhood is not indulgence, but investment. Hope, in this story, does not arrive as a grand promise. It arrives as patience, as restraint, as the willingness to let children remain unfinished in a world eager to define them. And this is where the idea of a critical update finally settles into focus. It was never about a new role, a new responsibility, or a new expectation placed on Prince Louis. The real update is about direction, about what this generation of royals believes is worth preserving, about the choice to prioritize inner life over outward performance. The monarchy may still be built on ceremony, but its future depends on something quieter: trust. And that, more than anything else, is what is being carefully protected right now. In the end, the story circles back to where it began. Not with an announcement, not with a title, not with a future role revealed too early. The update was never really about a prince. Prince Louis is not carrying the future of the monarchy on his shoulders. He is not being shaped as a solution, a symbol, or a reassurance for uncertain times. He is being allowed something far rarer: time. Time to grow without explanation. Time to exist without interpretation. Time to be a child before being anything else. That choice is not accidental. It is deliberate. It is the result of parents who understand how easily childhood can be consumed by expectation, especially when the world is watching. William and Catherine are not delaying responsibility out of avoidance. They are delaying it out of respect. Respect for development, for identity, for the quiet inner work that no institution should rush. When people spoke of a critical update, many expected a turning point in protocol or duty. What they were witnessing instead was a turning point in values. A moment where protection mattered more than projection, where restraint spoke louder than access, where less visibility meant more care. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about your own childhood or the kind of protection children deserve before the world asks anything of them, you can let that thought settle. A simple gesture of appreciation can be a quiet acknowledgement of what truly matters. You may want to leave a reflection of your own, a memory, or a belief about how childhood should be guarded. And if stories like this, stories that look beyond ceremony and into the human choices behind it, are worth returning to, staying connected keeps that space open. Because in the end, the strength of any institution is revealed not in how early it claims its children, but in how carefully it lets them grow. A monarchy that protects childhood may be the only one that survives the future.